Hello, good afternoon. My name is Berak Hussain. I'm the International Student Counselor at the Health and Counseling Services at Carleton University. Welcome to the first of our series in terms of self-esteem and development. We'll be having a three-part series over the next Thursdays, starting today, next week, and the week after on Thursdays at 2:30. And this came about due to the fact that we have lots of students and people who are struggling with the sense of self, whether it's confidence or self-esteem, and we'll take a look at the difference of what that means. And it's really important to understand that in order to develop our sense of identity, a sense of awareness of who we are, that we have a solid ground in terms of what self-esteem is all about. Now, before we start, I just want to make sure technically that the sound can be heard clearly. I want to make sure that you can hear everything before I go. And well, it sounds like the sound is good. Thank you for the feedback. So we'll jump right into it. So I'm just going to be sharing slides with us here as we go along with, there we go. All right. So again, welcome to everybody who's joining us on this platform and other platforms as well. We'll be taking a closer look today in terms of self-esteem and why we want to look at it and how we can truly benefit from growing our sense of self-awareness and self-esteem. So I'm just waiting for people to join us bit by bit here, and then we can jump right into it. So we'll be taking a look at the whole series in terms of looking at why we want to look at self-esteem. Why do we want to talk about it? Why do we want to learn more about it? We'll take a look at how to get ready for it in terms of the physical prep, not just the emotional and the spiritual, but taking a look at it from practical perspectives. We'll take a look at how self-esteem develops, and then we'll get into the three main chunks, or you could say building blocks, of what self-esteem is consisted of. And all this information is taken from the workbook called Self-Esteem by Dr. Cheraldi. So everything that we're looking at in this series is going to be taken from that workbook. And what he postulates is that self-esteem is developed upon worth and unconditional love. And if you have a solid ground of those two, then growth can occur. And then self-esteem, we'll take a look at later, can be in good balance. If one of these things are off, then it becomes really hard to develop that sense of self-esteem. So for today, the first part of the series, we'll be taking a look at the first four parts. So why self-esteem, getting ready in terms of the physical prep, how it develops, and I'm ambitious. Hopefully we'll get through the worth section as well. So let's jump right into it. So why do we want to study self-esteem? And like we were saying earlier, in order to have a really good understanding of our sense of worth and value, it really is worthwhile to build that. I see a lot of young people who come in and who are struggling with issues around depression or anxiety or other mental health challenges, especially when it comes to interactions and relationships, whether it's their family, friends, work, or all around them, and in terms of romantic relationships as well. And it seems that the roots of the issue sometimes is not necessarily the outwardness of what we see in terms of the symptoms or some of the signs, but rather in terms of the root, which is a low sense of self-esteem. And so Dr. Cheraldi takes a look at why it's important to study it, right? Because again, the root causes, when we bring it down to the root, it does look like it impacts depression and anxiety. And so people in his studies and the studies that he has cited as well in his book take a look at how stress and healthy mind is consistent of having good self-esteem. And we take a look here at Maslow's hierarchy, which is well known in psychology, and those of you who are psychology students have come across this before. You see that we, in order for us to get to our full self-actualization, we take a look at our physiological needs that are met in terms of safety and security, love and belonging. Self-esteem is here as well, right? In terms of our confidence, our achievements, and respect of others, and respect by others, but also self-respect, right? And in order to get to that, it's on the fourth level of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So let's take a look closer here in terms of Again, why self-esteem? Well, it seems to contribute to, like we said before, depression and anxiety and stress symptoms. We have psychosomatic illnesses such as headaches, perhaps insomnia, fatigue, and upset digestive issues as well. People could exhibit hostility or excessive or deep-seated anger. So it could be dislike and distrust of others. There could be that attitude of competitiveness as well. There could be abuse, whether you're in a relationship or it could be towards your children as well. It could be people who are entering into abusive, unhappy relationships, right? Alcohol and drug abuse, eating disorders, and unhealthy dieting. That's all been attributed to low self dislike, right? Poor communication, which could include non assertiveness, aggression, being defensive, critical, or even sarcastic styles. Those also can indicate low self dislike. Then there's also promiscuity, dependency, and sensitivity to criticism. And also a tendency sometimes you notice people put on this fake front, this false front, just to impress other people, right? And so this can include social difficulties, whether it's withdrawal or loneliness. And I see a lot of young people, and even just in the greater community, who struggle with these challenges. Again, it is contributed or attributed rather to self dislike. We also see that people who have low self-esteem, they have poor performance, let's say academic performance or preoccupation with problems, or even performance at work could be impacted. And status concern, right? People are constantly thinking about where they are in society, and especially in the world of social media that we see these days. That can also have a huge impact on self dislike. So before we get a little further, let's see where we are at right now. Okay. So the self-esteem checkup. For those of you who are watching, you can just go through this list or jot down some notes here. So you can rate from 1 to 10 how much you believe each of the following statements. And I'll read them out loud if they're too small to see. And 1 means that you completely disbelieve it, and 10 means you think it is completely true. So if we take a look here, the first statement, and just think in your mind from the scale of 1 to 10, am I a worthwhile person? Number 2, am I as valuable as anybody else? When I look, number 3, if I have qualities I need to live well, rather, I have the qualities I need to live well. Where do you see yourself from 1 to 10? Number 4, when I look into my eyes in the mirror, I have a pleasant feeling. Number 5, I don't feel like an overall failure. Number 6, I can laugh at myself. Number 7, I am happy to be me. Number 8, I like myself even when others reject me. That's a tough one, right? Number 9, I love and support myself regardless of what happens. Number 10, I am generally satisfied with the way I am developing as a person. Number 11, I respect myself. And finally, number 12, I'd rather be me than someone else. So I'll just give you a moment here to go through that list and rate each one. All right. So it's great to have a mini checkup to see where you're at before we begin delving deeper into the topics of self esteem, just seeing where you're at. And then that way we can see as we go further on where you are at. So another check is to rate your self-esteem on the following scale. So when it comes to, again, 0 to 10 to 100 here, in terms of total lack of self-esteem and total fullness of self-esteem. So the first one here, just rating yourself. How often do you feel restricted in your daily activities because of difficulties of self-esteem? Always, often, sometimes, rarely, or never. So you can just rate to see where you're at there. And the next one, how serious is your problem with self-esteem? There's no problem, mild problem, moderate problem, severe problem, extremely severe, or totally incapacitating. So again, here rating yourself, and this one from 1 to 6. And we go to the next one here. How serious is your problem with self-esteem? From no problem to totally incapacitating. So rate yourself there and see where you're at. And that will just give you an idea of where you're at and perhaps what you need to work on in terms of improving that sense of self. And regarding where you're at right now, it's always good to rate yourself. And then from that, you can have an idea to begin the next part. The next part is looking at getting ready in terms of the physical prep that is involved when developing our self-esteem. And it is all around exercise, sleep hygiene, and eating practices. And these are basic strategies in your basic self-esteem development, or rather stress management, right? Which involves taking a look at understanding how you are moving throughout the day or throughout the week in terms of the buildup of the stress hormones that you have. Is there an exit for them? Is there an outlet for them? So having some kind of exercise activity can remove this built up stress in your system, which is why you feel so great after a run or a swim or some kind of workout, right? So the release of the stress hormones out of your system brings in the endorphins in your system. Rather, the endorphins, happy hormones, right? Adrenaline, they flush out the cortisol and the stress hormones, which is why it's so important to have a regular type of exercise. So if we take a look here, we want to create a written plan of what is your exercise throughout the week, at least 4 to 5 times a week, at least 20 minutes of aerobic exercise. Think of what can you do if you're not already doing that. It could be going to the gym. It could be some kind of class online or in person. It could be just walking outside, right? Going for a run. Could be some martial arts, could be swimming, could be dance, could be anything, right? Even just 20 minutes of walking a day, if you can't do running, let's say, is a wonderful start. So see how you can incorporate that into your week, at least 4 times 20 minutes. You'll notice a difference. And you notice after you feel good after a workout with that, what happens here is that also can boost your sense of self as well, right? So what we want to do is have the building blocks here. This is our basic stress management, lifestyle management strategies that have a huge impact on the later stuff we're going to look at in terms of self-esteem. So sleep, that is a crucial one, right? Looking at having a good amount of sleep per night, a little more than you think you need, right? So perhaps if you sleep 7 hours, put in 8, right? Students, I know it's really hard these days during midterms and assignments, but heading into reading week, maybe you can catch up on sleep next week, right? It's really important to have that schedule, proper sleep, because this is where cell regeneration occurs, right? This is when you go into the deep REM sleep. It also helps. Apparently, it helps also with weight gain and weight loss. So it's really important when you have proper sleep that it also be aware that it can impact weight gain and weight loss. And I know a lot of people struggle with that at times as well. So it's really important that you have good amount of sleep. Also for students, a little tip here, when you have that proper sleep, what sleep does is also help you imprint what you are studying in your mind, right? So that way, when you are writing your exams or midterms, it will impact your memory in a positive way, right? So again, thinking about here, what your sleep looks like, and having a nice bedtime routine. That's really important. So cut out caffeine early on in the day, or if you're going to do caffeine or coffee rather, or teas, do decaf, right? That's a good option. There's also several tips that you could do before bedtime is slowing down. For example, not watching violent, dramatic things on TV, right? Having a routine heading into sleep, whether it includes shower or drinking some nice relaxation, sleepy time, chamomile kind of herbal teas, that kind of thing. And just slowing down before bed can really help lower your stress levels, which can also help your thoughts, right? It can also help. I mean, if you're having a bad day and you're already struggling with self-esteem, then chances are you're probably going to feel worse. So what you want to do is do a lot of self-care, especially before bedtime if possible. It can also be very self-compassionate, can also help with your sense of self-esteem. Finally, we've got our eating, and I could spend a long time talking about eating and eating patterns and so on and so forth. Essentially, what we want to take a look at when it comes to having an eating nutrition plan. And you can easily, as Carleton students, access the dietitian nutritionist that we have through dining services. You can go and just search it on the Carleton website. You can easily connect yourself to her and set up an appointment through the calendar she has to talk to her about healthy eating habits and creating a written plan for your meal plan. And what we want to what we want to see here is having breakfast, lunch, dinner, healthy snacks in between, lots of hydration throughout the day, colorful, bright foods on your plates, whether it's fruits, vegetables, your complex carbohydrates, as well as your different proteins. Really important to have that balance, right? And like we said, if you're going to snack healthy, energetic types of foods, whether it's nuts, dried fruits, yogurts, vegetables and dips, you name it. There's a variety of different things that you can definitely include in your nutrition plan. What you do is plan for dinner first on your meal plan. After you plan for dinner, that can be automatic leftover for the next day. So you can cook a variety of different things throughout the week that won't take up a lot of time to prepare. And this will also lower your stress levels when you prepare your foods ahead of time. So pick a day of the week where you're going to meal prep for the entire week, whether you can roast some chicken or salmon or whatever types of meats that you like with vegetables and a complex carbohydrate. Then you just box them up, put them in the fridge. You're ready to go. Just heat them up and go. And you can use thermoses, heat up your food in it and go with that. There's this really neat little gadget that I found from, for those of you in Canada and North America, from Bed Bath and Beyond. And it is this little crock pot that you can plug in and you can put your food in it and it'll heat it up for you. Let's say you're working in the office or in the lab or wherever, you can just heat it up and it'll heat up your food fresh. No need for microwave. Then just eat it right on the spot. So there's all these little tricks that you can do to make sure that you have your food and your snacks and your breakfast. You know, you can do overnight oatmeals, you can do smoothies, you can do sandwiches, whether it's bagels and so on and so forth. You can pre-prep these ahead of time. Then you just grab and go, especially students when you don't have time to prep all this stuff, but your brain needs it. So for the next 2 weeks, I'm going to challenge you to work on creating this written plan and implementing exercise, sleep, and eating in a healthy balance. Because if one of these things are off and you're hit with a difficult situation, then it becomes really challenging to deal with that situation. Also, after this series, we're going to be looking at burnout as well as stress management, where we'll focus a lot more on this aspect. So we're going to move ahead now and go on to the next part, which is to taking a look at self-esteem and how it develops. I also want to put it out there. If anybody has any questions or comments, please feel free to send them, whether it's on the Facebook pages or YouTube. Absolutely, just pop in your questions and I'll be more than happy to answer them as we go along. All right, so let's take a look at this next part here where we're looking at self-esteem and how it is developed. So you see here we have a scale, right, of what self-esteem is in terms of the self-defeating shame at one end and then self-defeating pride. And then self-esteem is right there in the middle. So this is the realistic, appreciative opinion of oneself, right? Realistic meaning it is accurate, it is honest. And what is appreciative means is that it's positive feelings and liking towards yourself, right? So possessing self-esteem is more favorable than high or low, meaning numbers, right? So we don't want to say high or low. Rather, because what that does, it becomes very comparative, right? And then you're being competitive. So what we want to look at is this range here, what we see on the scale, where you see you've got the self-defeating pride, where people can be very arrogant, people could believe that they're better than others, the narcissistic type, right? And if we look at the self-defeating, this is where you feel you're less than human, you're the dust of the earth, that type of expression, you're not worthy of respect, love, or value. And so what we want is, when we look at, having self-esteem, it's understanding your faults and things that you want to work on, and that you're content with who you are as you are. And so this is the concept that we're going to be working with throughout this series. It's not necessarily, if we say high or low self-esteem, this is what we're referring to, is on that scale of self-defeating versus defeating pride, because we want to be right in the middle of understanding what we need to work on, understanding our mistakes and negativities and our faults, but also being aware of our strengths, right? And also being content with who we are. All right. So let's jump now to the next part and taking a look at some definitions around the word self-esteem. And there's a lot of words here that sometimes can be interchanged, right? When looking at what self-esteem means. And so let's take a look here and to describe a little bit further in terms of what self-esteem is all about, using these different concepts. So when we take a look at the word identity, identity answers the questions of who am I? What defines me and my essential character, right? Identity provides a sense of one's individuality. Sorry, I'm not pronouncing words properly. So it takes a look at our sense of ourselves and our individuality. So, for example, a woman's identity could be derived from her role as, let's say, a wife or a mother, right? A paraplegic's identity could be defined not necessarily by a crippled body, but by the real or inner self. So that is what identity means, and in context of what we're looking at. Let's take a look at the word appreciate. So what that means essentially is to think well of or value or to enjoy, right? To recognize gratefully, to rightly estimate the quality or worth of somebody or something. Accept is to receive with pleasure. So, for example, to take in one's own favorably with pleasure. So, for example, approve, believe in, respond to favorably. Self acceptance is believing in oneself and receiving oneself favorably in with pleasure. So, one may accurately acknowledge one's weakness to determine something or to improve and strengthen themselves, right? And they can still accept themselves. So, the internal dialogue could be, I acknowledge my faults. I love myself, though not necessarily all of my behaviors. And as I improve my behavior, then I can feel good about me and my behavior. So that is what acceptance is about. Let's take a look at self confidence. So, this usually refers to a belief in one's abilities. And I think sometimes self esteem and self confidence are interchanged, and there is a difference between them, right? So, again, self confidence is referring to one's belief in their own abilities, and it's related to the competency and self efficacy of those abilities. So, as one's competencies increase, right, one's confidence could also increase. In the broader and deeper sense, self confidence is a belief of oneself as a person, leading to a general sense of, for example, I can do it, right? So self confident people might say to themselves, for example, because anyone can do just about anything given the time, practice, experience, resources, why can't I, right? I may not succeed completely or quickly, but the direction will be desirable. So demonstrating competence is absolutely satisfying, right? But it is an outgrowth of self-worth. So there's no real way of establishing it. Competence and confidence, they again correlate with self-esteem, like we said, but they're not casual. So if we base feelings of worth on competence and achievements, then if we fail, there's no worth. So that's the connection there. Let's take a look at pride, right? And this is a really interesting one, where it is quoted that pride makes some men ridiculous, but prevents others from being so. And so there's two sides to pride as it relates to self-esteem. There's self-defeating, and then there's the healthy, right? So as discussed earlier, we said self-defeating pride is the attitude that one is superior, they're more valuable, they're more important as a person than others. And these people also perceive themselves as more capable, more self sufficient, or infallible. than they actually are. So, synonyms for self defeating pride include arrogance, conceit, haughtiness, pretentiousness, trying to improve. There's vanity, right? Excessive desire or need to be admired. There's narcissism, which is the selfish, grandiose sense of the self, exploitive, right? And so self defeating pride is typically rooted in fear, believe it or not, as in the fear of being vulnerable and or the need to defend themselves. So healthy pride is a realistic sense of one's own dignity and worth, their own self-respect, the gratitude and delight in their achievements, whether it's their talents, their service, or membership, let's say of a family or a race or a culture or a group. So there is that balance of a healthy pride as well. And it's a positive quality to have as opposed to pride in itself. And I know that in a lot of spiritual and religious, in that context, there's a lot around when it comes to pride in terms of self-development, right? And spiritual development. And that's a different area, but I know there's a lot of studies and a lot of research and talks and discussions around that as well. And it's all related here as well. So let's take a look here at humility. Humility, there's also two sides to it, right? There's the self defeating humility and healthy humility. So, self defeating is an abject lack of that self respect. So, again, that expression of dust of the earth, right? And we see spineless submission and contemptibility. When we look at the opposite of healthy humility on the other side, this involves an absence of self defeating pride, right? So the recognition of one's imperfections or weaknesses or things they need to work on, the consciousness of their own shortcomings and ignorance, and they're teachable, right? So it is the realization that everybody has equal worth, and healthy humility relates to meek behavior, so in the positive sense. So for example, meaning mild, patient, not easily stirred to anger. Healthy humility and healthy pride, they coexist in the person with self-esteem. So humility because one realizes how much one still has to learn, and pride in recognizing the dignity and worth one shares with all other human beings. So there's this amusing story that relates to lack of healthy humanity. And a guru advised the scholar one time, go out in the rain and raise your arms upwards. That'll bring you a revelation. So the next day, the scholar reported back, when I followed your advice, water flowed down my neck, he told the guru. I felt like a complete fool. So for the first day, that's quite a revelation, replied the guru. So it is a sense of pride and awareness and humility that, you know what, you admitted to being a fool, lifting up your arm in the rain like that and didn't really gain anything. But you recognize that and acknowledge that. So it's a little side joke there. So finally, let's take a look at selfishness, right? And so some mistakenly equate selfishness with self-esteem. How? Because let's state there's an important principle. The purpose of self esteem is to transcend the self. So, self consciousness, we know, is a painful situation that keeps our focus inward, right? Healing the pain with love enables one's focus to expand outward. So, this makes one freer to love others and enjoy life. So, the person with self esteem loves by choice from a secure base, as opposed to, let's say, a codependent individual who possesses neither self esteem nor choice. Therefore, we see that building self esteem warrants our best efforts. So let's take a look at the next part here. I know there's a pack of information to go through here, but let's take a look at the actual foundations in terms of how we want to take a look at building our self esteem. This diagram here beautifully explains how it goes in terms of the layout of the book and the layout of the series that we're going to be working through. And to understand that the first building block here is to have that unconditional worth. All right. The next part is love. And of course, I'm going to get into each one of them in more detail. We're going to look at worth in a moment. And you have love. So the idea is to have it as strong as possible. It doesn't have to be perfect 100%, because I think that's a misconception and that's not a realistic expectation to have of a human being, to have 100% unconditional worth, right? So if we have a fairly solid foundation, if we could use those terms instead of a perfect foundation, a fairly solid foundation of unconditional worth and love, then you see how growth can also be steady and strong on top of this foundation. When all three are in that healthy, solid balance, right, then self-esteem can be in a good balance. If one of these things are not solid, what happens obviously is that self-esteem will topple. And what we want to do is make sure that we do have a solid sense of unconditional worth, love, which can help grow the rather growth, and then which can help put our self-esteem in that balance. So before we go on to our next section of understanding that core self a little bit more, are there any comments or questions so far? All good? All right. Let's head on to the next section, which takes a look at understanding what this core self is all about. So, again, this is from a psychological, spiritual perspective based on the book that Dr. Cheraldi had written in terms of self-esteem workbook. We want to take a look at here the human core, right? Which is called the essential spiritual self, which is what in his terms he calls it reflective of sunlight, right? So it is beautiful, lovable, full of potential, just like the embryo. And that's a really nice analogy or metaphor to connect with because it is surrounded by externals, which can hide that inner core. So other eternals can also brighten the core or they can darken that, right? The love of others can help us feel our worth, while mistakes, criticisms, all of that can camouflage, making it really difficult to see and experience our own worth. And this is a crucial point here to understand when we take a look at that core worth and the internal and the external. And there's different names, like we said, it could be the spiritual core self. I know, for example, in different faiths, there is the concept of the three parts of the self reproaching self, the enlightened self, of the serene self, and the self that is constantly fighting within itself, the struggle. And so these different parts can also help us reach that high sense of self-esteem or that sense of self that is at peace and serene, right? It's kind of analogous to Freud's id, superego, and the ego, right? So if we go further here, let's take a look here at some really important concepts here. And sorry about the words here, they're not put out really well. But essentially what we see here is how worth as a person and your value as a human being is completely independent of any of these external factors. What could argue that your sense of self is dependent upon these? In reality, and according to Dr. Cheraldi, they're not. And if you think about this further, depending on, let's say, what your culture, your spiritual sense, or how you view things in the world, you could also connect your sense of worth in terms of the universe and in terms of, let's say, God, in terms of your worthiness, right? So here, this concept and more, I guess, on the material sense, and there are some also non-material concepts here as well, is we're looking at things that have to do with your energy level, your appearance, your strength, your skills, part of your, let's say, decision making as well. It's also included the car you drive, your spirituality, the blessings, right? Takes a look also at your family image, personality, your marriage status. And all of these things are huge as young developing people where you place your worth on. Let's take it a little bit further. This day and age, it's all about social media. Your value and worth is dependent upon how many follows, how many likes, how many this, how many that. In reality, and in truth, your worth is completely independent of that. However, we tend to believe that our value and our worth is dependent upon how many likes, how many follows we have, and how many comments. And I see a lot of young people who come into my office and say, you know what? I feel depressed or I feel suicidal because nobody's liked my picture. And they sit relentlessly waiting for somebody to like or comment on their picture. And you see how they place their worth, their sense of value on that little tick there. And so that's really dangerous. And you see a lot of people doing that, not even just young people at university, all over the place, right? So this is really important when we take a look at this list here, is to understand that your value and your worth as a human being is completely dependent upon that, including your present functioning levels, whether you're comparing yourself to other people or even your judgment of others. And this is a big one, especially, let's say, judgment of your family, your friends, your teachers, your parents, your peers, again, on the online platforms. So it's really important to almost extract yourself from connecting your worth and value upon these external factors. Rather, your worth and value is independent. And we want to work on that. Part of self-development and of your self-esteem is this concept right there. It's completely separating your worth and value from external factors. If we go a little further here, let's take a look at how that is done, right? We saw here earlier when we took a look at the core worth here, because we see that it is really difficult to separate, right? Because of the impact of our social pressures, social media. You have to be a certain look, let's say. You have to be a certain type. You have to be fitting into a certain scheme or social theme, right? So, in terms of an expectation in order to be worthy, right? And this impacts our younger people greatly as they're developing, as we see here. So, it's really important to see how you can separate that, right? And it is possible. And hopefully throughout the series, that will also help you do that. So we see, when are these equal, right? So let's take a look at when. So we see here that the example of the fluctuation with the externals, right? So when you feel good about yourself, when you're complimented externally, right? We always feel good when we're complimented externally, rather than feeling good about ourselves, regardless of those compliments, right? So that's why your feelings would go beyond the normal and appropriate sadness and disappointment with challenging situations, right? For example, when worth is in doubt, what happens is depression tends to follow, or anxiety tends to follow. And that's the link right there, right? So we want to be able to understand how events and performance, they can impact our worth. But what we want to do is try to separate that your worth stays the same regardless of all of these external factors. If we go a little bit further here and we take a look at how our worth, when worth is separate from our external, so you see how here is that our worth becomes unchanging and inherent regardless of whatever the outside external factors are, right? Or the events. So regarding, for example, the core worth of ourselves by appreciating the marvelous intricacies of our body, for example, as the metaphor of the core self and how it functions and works. For example, one of my favorite quotes, when taking a look at defining our worth and uplifting our worth, and this is by Aristotle, is that all men are alike when asleep. Right? That's pretty powerful if you think about it. We're all equal of value when we're asleep because we're exactly the same, right? And so what we want to do is to work on that. And what we want to do is to make our worth completely unchanging and inherent, regardless of the events and the performances that happen around us. So this is a very powerful strategy when we start looking at how we start working on defeating, or rather, overcoming our negative thoughts. So this is an actual strategy that we use in therapy, a cognitive behavioral type of strategy. And what we see here is takes a look at recognizing and replacing self-defeating thoughts. So what happens? We have these 13 unfavorable automatic thoughts that run through our days. How many times? Many, many times, right? So there's assuming, right? We're always assuming of others and ourselves. The should have, could have, would have, right? There's the fairy tale fantasy, all or nothing fantasy. All or nothing thinking, right? There's overgeneralizing, constantly overgeneralizing. There's labeling, there's dwelling on the negative. There's rejecting the positive, unfavorable comparisons of ourselves to others. We tend to catastrophize as well. And also blaming and making feelings facts. How many of you can say that we've experienced these, huh? Absolutely. They're continuously running through our heads. And, it's kind of normal, I guess, in a way, common, normal, that we have these thoughts. It becomes abnormal when that's all and how you are thinking can really, really impact you in a negative way. So how do we work with this? Let's take a look at this chart, which Dr. Cheraldi calls the daily thought record. And it's a great tool that you can use when you have a negative distortion that comes in, one of the 13 that we took a look at here, and looking at how we can work on that. And anybody who wants this, you can email me and then I'll be more than happy, or message me and I'll send this to you. So let's take a look here. So what we want to write down initially is the event that made you feel bad or unpleasant, right? So you write it down. Then you want to take a look at the impact of how that made you feel. Made you feel upset, made you feel anxious, low, depressed. So you jot that down there. And then you rate out of 10 how much you truly believe that. So I'm going to give you a second here to do that. All right. So hopefully that gave you a moment there to think about a situation that has upset you or bothered you, or even something at the moment right now. Write down how you felt about it and rate it out of 10. Next, we're going to go down to the next part where it says, describe the automatic thoughts or self talk. So here you're allowed to say anything negative to yourself, but only this part. For example, I'm such a loser. You're allowed to write that there. Oh, that was silly of me, or that was stupid, or so on. Only in this section. So you can write down a few things here. And then what we want to do is we want to rate out of 10. How much do we truly believe these negative thoughts? So 1 out of 10, write them out. And then we're going to label what distortion it is. So if you go back here, I'm going to go back and show you the slides for the distortions. Write down which automatic thought is it. Am I rejecting the positive? Am I blaming? Am I personalizing? That's a pretty common one, right? Am I overgeneralizing? Am I assuming? Am I just labeling here? Am I dwelling on the negative? So write down which one it is, right? So for example, I'm such a loser. That would be labeling yourself, right? And perhaps even personalizing, saying something like that was my fault, or somebody else saying it and you truly believing it. So then that would be personalizing right there and blaming. So then you write down here the fallacy, which one it is. And then this is where we do the work. This is where we start doing that self struggle to building our sense of worth, right? So here you're going to write down a reasonable thought to replace that negative thought. You're going to rate also how much you believe it. A lot of people, when I do this exercise with them, are saying, it's so hard to reframe that or give a more reasonable thought. But here, if you give it the opportunity and the chance, you will notice that you are able to reframe it. You know what? I'm not a loser. I just tripped on myself and knocked things down. Doesn't make me a loser, right? You can maybe laugh at yourself, right? So you can reframe that here. And then you rate it out of 10. How much do you truly believe this out of 10? Right? And when you do that part, next what we want to do is you want to go back and re-rate the initial thoughts of the initial responses. What we notice here, or what's supposed to happen is that it goes down. You don't feel it as intensely or believe that thought. And you go back up here, right where it says the intensity, and you notice that it is not as high, which then lowers the negative impact of this event. So this is an extremely powerful tool that you can apply daily to the challenges around you, to people around you, but especially to yourself when you notice yourself being harsh on yourself. All right. So let's take a look at another strategy and 3 strategies here that can really improve and really build upon. Now, what we want to understand is every single section that we're working here is building upon the section before. We want to be able to nail, for example, like we said, as much as we can, the building blocks of the eating, sleeping, exercise. We want to balance those. And once we do that for a while, then we can get into building our sense of worth, understanding these concepts that we took a look at, and then applying this strategy that we started with. Once we learn how to separate our worth and our value, looking at how to reframe negative thoughts, whether it's an event or something that happened, or just even just a thought that comes, in terms of how to replace it with a more reasonable thought. When we built that, now we can build upon these other strategies. So let's take a look at mastering those other ones in terms of recognizing and replacing self-defeating thoughts. Let's take a look at acknowledging reality versus unpleasant external conditions. And this is without condemning the core self, right? We're not judging that. So we want to use that mindful, non-judgmental attitude towards ourselves so we can still feel good about ourselves by still being critical, right? So let's take a look here. And understanding, like we said, the nevertheless is a very powerful tool that can really help us build upon that, right? So let's take a look here. Let's take a look at this example here. So even though I know it's not a very interactive format here, but if anybody would like to also give me a concept here or a thought of even though. So for example, even though as students, right, even though I didn't do well on this exam, so an external, right, so studies. So even though, what we want to say is nevertheless, I am still a worthy person. I am still a good human being. I'm still somebody of value and worth, right? So think of something that has made you feel unpleasant or any external, right? Even though, then you could say, nevertheless, and then you replace it with something like that. So I'll give you a moment to think about that. So we take a look here at this example. I grabbed the book. By the way, this is the book that we are using. It's called the Self-Esteem Workbook by Glenn Cheraldi. So he gives us examples of, even though I didn't do well in that project, I botched it, nevertheless, I'm a worthwhile person, right? I'm still of great worth. I'm still an important and valuable human being. My worth is infinite and unchangeable. Remember, we want to keep that infinite, straight, unchangeable, no matter what the event is, to our worth. So, for example, you have a funny nose. Somebody makes fun of the way you look. And this is really something I notice a lot with young people with their body image, or anybody really with the body image issues, right? So what we want to do is separate worth and value from the way we look. So even though you look a certain way, does that impact the way who you are, your value as a human being? Absolutely not, right? Um, you're a big dummy, you're an idiot. You hear these comments as well. So again, all right, so you do something, somebody's calling you a name or something. And this is especially when we look at bullying, right? Whether it's online cyberbullying or in-person bullying, how would you let and allow other people to impact you? If you've got that strong sense of self, like we said, good self-esteem, anybody says anything to you, we're not going to let that impact us, right? Because you're still a person of value and worth. All right, let's take a look at the next part here, where we are taking a look at regarding our core worth. So what this exercise does You want to think of what you have rather than what you lack, right? So, one of the things you have, for example, what is it that you have? Perhaps you have good character. Perhaps you have, for example, an attribute um, that is playfulness, or it could be dignity, gentleness, or anything like that, right? So if you have something like that, and then you say, you select the best, and then reflect how eagerly you would have thought and sought them if you did not have them, right? This is something that really can help you develop your abilities and our strengths, right? Things to work on rather than we're not good at something, right? So this idea here, again, I want to say this statement, and then this is by Marcus Aurelius, who says, and I really appreciate this quote because I think it really shows what this concept of regarding your core worth is all about. So thinking of what you have rather than what you lack, and of the things that you have, select the best, and then reflect how eagerly you would have fought and sought them if you didn't have them, right? So take something that you think that you can build upon and work upon like that. And finally, we've got creating the habit of self affirming thoughts, right? So the idea behind that and is to take some statements, and I'll read some out here. For example, I think well of myself. This is good. I can criticize my own behavior without questioning my worth as a human being. I expect others to like and respect me. If they don't, that's okay. I like to help others enjoy themselves. I'm aware of my strengths and I respect them. I can make a difference in people's lives by what I contribute. I consider myself a worthwhile person. I like being a one of a kind portrait. I'm glad to be unique rather than constantly comparing ourselves to other people, right? I like myself without comparison to others. I feel stable and secure inside because I'm right. I rightly regard my core worth. I generally show sound judgment in relationships and work. I am generally capable of living well and of applying the time, effort, patience, training, and assistance needed to do so. I enjoy the achievements and progress that others make without concluding they are more valuable than I am as a person. And the list goes on and on. And these are just some examples of affirmations, right? But what we want to do is we want to create this habit where, for example, how we can build these core affirming thoughts is sitting in a quiet place, with a well-supported chair where you're comfortable for about 20 minutes. And then you close your eyes, take some deep, slow breaths, get oxygen where it needs to go, try to relax your body mentally for a pleasant experience. And then you open your eyes long enough to read these statements one by one. You close your eyes and then you concentrate on that statement. So, like we said, the first one, I think well of myself. Repeat it to yourself 3 times slowly, allowing yourself to feel as though the statements are completely accurate. You might wish to imagine yourself in a situation actually thinking and believing this statement, right? So use all of your senses to experience this statement. Now, don't worry if a statement doesn't apply to you. Just think of this um, as patient practice, right? And creating a new mental habit. Don't allow negative or pessimistic thoughts to distract you or undermine the step by step progress, and accept whatever actually happens. So, without demanding this perfection, remember, we are building these blocks as best as we can. They don't have to be perfect. And if a statement does not feel right, bypass it, leave it, and return to it later, or modify it so it does feel right. So you have the flexibility to do that. So we're going to repeat this for each of these statements, right? And if you like, you pop me an email or message me, and I'll be more than happy to send you a copy of these affirmations. And you want to practice this almost daily, right? To increase your habits by these really impactful affirming thoughts, right? So when you do this for a while, you'll notice that there's a change, or at least we hope that you notice there's a change, right? You may notice that with practice, these thoughts begin to feel more and more comfortable, almost like trusted friends, right? And the thoughts that do not become comfortable with 6 days will likely become so when you return to practicing this. So, we are at the end of the section of core worth. And just do a quick review of what we've done today. Today, we've taken a look again at understanding what self esteem is all about, how it develops with our building blocks and our triangle by having stable boxes and foundations. And we've just completed the first foundation, which is the value of worth, right? What we did with that is we took a look at separating our core worth from the external factors, right? And this is something that is really, really important. And I'll just go back here so that review this again. We took a look at this concept as your worth is completely independent of external values or external anything. And what we want to do after that is looking at separating, right? And how do we separate is when we keep our worth, right? Our worth stays steady no matter what happens with the externals around us, right? And we took a look at this strategies by being able to recognize and replace self-defeating thoughts by using the daily thought record, by taking an event that makes you feel unpleasant, looking at the impact of that event, writing down the thoughts and feelings, and then the intensity from 1 to 10, how much you believe it. At this point, you probably believe it high. Then we're going to write down all the negative thoughts here, put them out of 10, probably high. And we're going to go back and say, which distortion was it? We're going to label the distortion, and then we're going to do the work of that self struggle of replacing with a more reasonable thought, rating that again out of 10. And then at the bottom, the result is what we want to do is based on your thought analysis, re-rate how much you believe your initial responses, and then you re-rate the intensity of your emotion, which at this point we hope has reduced, right? So this is a great strategy to work with. And these three here, nevertheless, even though, nevertheless, so this is a really great strategy regarding our core worth and our abilities and our capabilities. If there's something that we have, and then if we didn't have it, how hard would we work towards it? So looking at what you have in terms of whether it's dignity, generosity, compassion, how would you work on these if you didn't have them? And finally, creating the habit of affirming thoughts. Daily practice of going through, it can be the ones I have, it can be ones online, just daily affirmations, reading through them and meditating and really taking them and being self-compassionate. All right, so this is the end of this section of the building block of core worth. Next week, we're going to be starting with love, and this is a really good section. So we'd like you to practice these over the next week. If you have any questions or comments, you're more than welcome to contact me through my email, Berak, Hussain at carleton.ca, or you can just message Carleton Wellness, or if it's on Instagram, same thing. My name is Berak Hussain. You can catch me there. Thank you very much for joining. If you have any questions, now's the time. I don't believe there are any questions or comments. You can always message me after. I'll be more than happy to answer them. Take care, and we'll see you next week. Goodbye.